Welcome to the Musician Circle podcast with your host, Aidan Brookstone, only at Studio Raphael. All right, Dan, thank you so much, man, for joining me on the Musician Circle. Super stoked to have you here. So,
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Cool, yeah, so tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what music means to you in your life, and yeah, just sort of see what comes up.
Yeah, very cool. Well, my name's Dan, Dan Poli. Poli, not the double L, not Miss Polly. That was a high school nickname that I'm really glad to be rid of now as an adult. I get to speak to you from all the way, almost as far south as you can get. So I'm in Melbourne in Australia, and I'm proud to say that today we have a nice, warm, sunny day. So it doesn't happen too often here, but yeah, we've come into the real thick of spring now. So it's a beautiful sunny day, and yeah, glad to be joining and having a chat.
Maybe
I guess
just,
really, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Maybe it's my predisposition of Australia, but I assume that it was always like 40 degrees there. Is that wrong?
Don't worry, it'll get to that in November, December.
Okay.
It'll hit that in Melbourne. The further north you go, yeah, it stays quite hot most of the year. But
Cool.
yeah, we're pretty far south. We get pretty cold winters, and usually we don't get warmth until around now. And then December and January is when we go into our proper bushfire.
Nice.
Everyone freak out in panic mode.
I see. Cool. And then so this is your studio space you're in at the moment right now? Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a sort of half studio space home office. So during COVID, it had to convert into a home office working space. So it's become a bit of a hybrid sort of place to be. But I've gotten pretty good at being able to separate work and fun. Which is really cool, and it's pretty well kitted out here. It's got a lot of soundproofing going on, and spend a bit of time, measuring reflections and doing the right thing. So it's more of a proper home studio vibe. You definitely wouldn't record an album that you'd send too far to the public or to any major labels. But for mixing and for basic tracking, this absolutely does the job.
Nice. And so I guess instrument of choice. What's yours?
Instrument of choice, guitar and vocals.
Nice.
I always dreamed of being the next Eddie Van Halen, and learned very quickly that wasn't going to happen. I definitely didn't have the skills or the patience for it. So, yeah, nice. Stuck to strumming.
Do you, if you say guitar and vocals, do you write your own songs too?
Yeah, I do. I've written for a bunch of others as well.
Nice.
Thrown in a verse or a chorus or a little lick here and there for some other artists, and doing the eternal journey of writing my own album that never seems to happen, but it'll get there eventually.
Yeah, you'll get there. I think sometimes it's kind of, as musicians, I mean myself definitely, unless I set a sort of deadline, I kind of just let things push and push and push. And,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you'll get there one day.
And then you always get stuck in the trap of I love production, I love recording, and I love playing with sounds. And I think the further into that rabbit hole you get, you end up in this you end up in this vicious cycle that you write the song and then you start mixing and producing the song and you never finish.
I know.
And there's always, let's change that chorus, or let's change that guitar tone, or let's get a different drum sound, and it never gets finished. So as creative people, I think the deeper you get into that, the more you put yourself in a bit of a hole that you need to learn how to get out of.
For sure. And definitely, when I'm working on my own stuff and I'm mixing it as well, I find it's a lot harder to approach it from like a bit of an objective opinion. And when you're so emotionally connected to your work as well, oh man, I'll sit there and work on the same sound for hours and hours. And then I'll get out of the mix and I'll be like, hey, what does this sound like? And everybody's like, dude, your low end is totally gone. Everything sounds super stringy and high. And I'm just like, center myself, we're good, we're gonna go back to it. And
look, I mean, I guess a little bit off track from where the conversation started, but you're exactly right. I do the same thing. And you ask your musician friends, what do you think, I'm finally proud of this mix, and they come back with, oh man, really can't hear this, or gee, that guitar tone, nah, that's not right. But then you ask just a regular human that listens to music, and they'll always sit there and go, that's awesome, that's great, I really like it. So I think we also get in the trap of, we ask for the advice of our peers, which is great, but maybe we take that a little bit too seriously, forgetting that 90% of people don't know the difference between a good kick drum sound and a bad kick drum sound.
For sure. I mean, I think the general populace can feel it. They understand, when they're in the club or on the dance floor or whatever, they can feel if the kick drum is banging or not, and they'll be able to, you can kind of tell as the artist whether or not they're moving and dancing to what the production is. But yeah, for the most part, I don't know. Most people just, I guess, they don't understand the same sort of technical stuff that we do, and learning how to separate ourselves from the
Right.
criticism and instead seeing it as a way to grow and to
Yep.
learn. And yeah, we're all, I think, as expressive people and expressive beings, we get a little too closely attached to what people say of us and the critiques that are given to our work, as though,
Yep.
somehow if some
That's why
people,
you
yeah,
never read the comments.
ah, yeah, I guess that's the nice part in some ways, that in my quest towards making positive content, is that generally speaking, what people say back to me is also, positive. I still have to
Yep.
learn how to, like, I don't know. I think the toughest thing for me is that in some ways, like with my setup, like literally somebody said to me, put a poster on the wall. So I got a poster on the wall there. But this is not a studio. Yes, the brand is Studio
Right.
Raphael, but this is a bedroom. And I think there's sort of, people see it and they're like, yeah, you're saying you're in a studio, but we can see there's a bed right beside you. And learning how
Yep.
to, I guess, put myself in that space without necessarily needing the atmosphere to make that exact statement is, yeah, I don't know exactly how that relates to the beginning of it, but
No, no, I get
no,
it.
yeah,
You're always going to get a criticism about something, right? But
totally.
this is your creative space. This is where you create. This is where you're doing what you're doing. Just because it doesn't suit someone else's aesthetic,
Yep.
well, that's unfortunate. You can do your best, but
Hmm.
it's still your space.
And we're all pursuing a process as well. It's like
Yeah.
it's a day by day mission, goal, objective that, you know so long as we are taking the steps and not allowing the negative feedback to get in the way of the positive steps that we're taking towards what we all love, which is music. There's
Yep.
always going to be the naysayers. There's always going to be the people that try and put us down and try and make us feel bad because, they don't want to see others rise higher than them. But
Yep.
yeah, it's, I mean, especially for me in this undertaking, it's sort of creating a atmosphere and an environment of lifting one another up and sort of starting to recognize this whole competitive mindset and the way we've kind of all been pit against each other as musicians and artists and everything. It's just so, I don't know. It's a lot of things, but one thing
It
is,
doesn't really feel right.
yeah, absolutely. It's
Yep.
reconnecting with our human nature, I guess. I think that's something that music really does for me.
Yep.
And I guess is like also a cool part of something like this is that, it's using music as this way to connect, which music so naturally does for us. It's that sort of thing where if people are playing in a circle, which I like the concept of a circle for this sort of a thing, if music's happening and there's a drum waiting there for you, anybody can walk up to that drum and just start playing along. And that's, it's such a powerful means of connection. Learning how to utilize that, especially in this day and age, in a world where there is so much division, it's
Mm.
yeah, it's an exciting undertaking. So on the note of like sort of criticism and that sort of stuff, I was talking with some people about things they'd find interesting, and definitely the whole world of criticism is it's a tough one for most creatives. So in sort of your path, where you came from in dealing with criticism, how was that something that you were able to, I guess, take on, process, and maybe even just compartmentalize in your journey?
Yeah. A lot of therapy. Um,
Fair
Look,
enough.
I
Yeah.
found I found the criticism pretty hard initially,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess my musical journey is actually quite accidental. As a professional, it's quite an accidental journey. It was never something that I set out to achieve. It wasn't a goal that I sat there until I was a late teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And again, every step after that was quite accidental in the timeline of how it happened. So I wasn't really prepared or practiced a lot. And I was quite lucky at 18 to have landed a gig in quite a popular band in Australia at the time.
Hmm.
So, I guess my jump start into that industry was quite big, was, pretty big shows, some of my first shows that I played were in front of 20,000 people.
Oh man, that's pressure.
Yeah, the pressure didn't really make sense to me, so I didn't feel it.
Right.
The criticism, though, like, again, because I didn't necessarily build up, I didn't go through those steps. I didn't play a million open mic nights and fail a million times before I got there. The dealing with the criticism was pretty harsh initially because, I found myself as an 18-year-old achieving all these dreams that I had never really set out to achieve. But man, there's people bashing me down. There's people bashing all of us down. This isn't right. Like, we did our best. We played amazing. We wrote a great song, whatever it might have been. Dealing with that initially was pretty tricky until I got one piece of advice from a good friend of mine early on who had been a professional musician for many, many years and had an incredibly successful career of his own. And he just said to me, the key is balancing your ego and remembering that you're the one on the stage. Everyone else in that crowd can boo you as much as they want. Right. They can not like what you're doing as much as they want, but they're not the musician. They're not the creator. They're not the one standing under lights. You are, and they're here to see you. So they can be as negative as they want, but they still came to see you.
Right.
It's not a great piece of advice. It's certainly not something that's going to go down in history, but that really resonated with me to remember that, yeah, I'm the one standing here and you guys all bought tickets. Now, it's not my name on the poster. I'm part of the band, or I'm part of the crew, or I might be the support act, or whatever it is. But man, you guys all bought tickets, not me.
Yeah. But I mean, even adding on to that, like, it's also the fact that you're the one of everybody in that audience. You're the one taking risk and putting yourself out there. And I think that's like,
right.
That's another side of it that, even I like to relate it to the podcast in ways just because it's my own journey at the moment as well. It's like, in starting this, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it was pushing myself to take a risk and try something new and do something different. And kind of in the same way as when you're on stage and trying something different, everybody out there, everybody in the audience can look at you and they can judge and they can project and they can take whatever idea they have in their head of you and, believe that that's you. But, at the end of the day, you're the person who's pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, doing something different. You're taking a risk and you're exploring something for your own benefit. And to have a mindset towards somebody who's doing that and saying whatever sort of negative comments come through, generally speaking, that's a reflection on the individual. That's not a reflection of the person on stage. So I think just learning for most creatives how to take that negativity, because there's a great way to. You don't have to play the most amazing show, and somebody can be in the audience and say to you, there's two ways of giving feedback. One way is that sucked. You should never get on stage again. Why the heck would you do that? The other way is, hey man, like, kudos to you for taking that risk. Incredible work up there. There's definitely some things that, you can improve on in your technicality of your playing and whatever else, but more power to you. All the best. And I look forward to seeing you play sometime in the future. And it's sort of that, it's the positive mindset versus the negative mindset, where the negative wants to immediately shut it down and the positive sees it as an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And look, for us, as creatives and as musicians, I think all creatives, even writers, actors, painters, whatever a creative industry it is, you're always going to get it. There's always going to be someone there, but it just doesn't matter. And I know that's, really easy for me to say, but
no,
it really just it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're doing what you do, and that's a gift that you've got and that person may not have.
Yeah.
Just you keep doing you. I've got the benefit of having a 9-year-old son.
Nice.
And I get to teach him these weird little lessons, and as part of teaching him these things, I guess I'm still learning a lot. That you're right, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm telling him, don't worry about what everyone else thinks. Doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. And then I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, you're right, Dad. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You're doing you.
Yeah.
And that's, if Led Zeppelin had listened to all the criticism that they were getting initially, I'm sure they wouldn't have released hardly anything. You know, there's so many bands in history that if they had listened to the shit that they were being given initially, we would never have heard some of the greatest music created. So again, it's always there. I guess I've found in Melbourne at least, I find more criticism from the industry than from the general public, which is why it's a bit more frustrating. Like, you know, there's always another guitarist sitting there wondering, you know, how did that guy get the gig? He's not a great guitarist. He's not, you know, oh, I'm a better guitarist. Well, then you go and get the gig, man.
Yeah.
You go and do it.
No, for sure. It's I think the nature of industry tends to pit people against one another because it ties us to how much money we're making versus, you know, the industry is so much more than just being a talented musician. It's also it's who you know. It's a game of network and putting yourself in the right place at the right time. Some people get really lucky, which, you know, luck is also a culmination of a bunch of things, but still sometimes just people just strike gold at the right time, and then it's so easy for us to look at somebody else's successes and I guess compare ourselves to that. And that was actually something that was discussed a little bit in the last conversation as well, with this guy Chris, who, you know, we were talking about the whole DJ scene and how these guys who are like a lot of the time bigger DJs, they've been doing it for like 20, 30 years sometimes, where they've slowly built up a career to the point that they've created a buzz around their set, and then friends of friends end up telling up friends of friends, and slowly but surely they build up an audience. And it's a commitment and a dedication to the craft that creates a fan base, which, you know, I can understand why for you as well, when you were thrown up on stage at 18 to 20,000 people, you didn't have that time to build up, you know. I get that at the same time you weren't necessarily on stage to create your own brand by any means, but still not having that process of working your way up and going through the trials and tribulations of creating some sort of baseline audience, you know. It's hard to take on that much criticism at once, and
and building that thick skin, right?
And it's, I think as well, like, in some ways it's about learning how to filter negativity, in the sense that sometimes in the negative words, if we can kind of picture it like sand, maybe you're sifting through it, but maybe there is sort of a diamond in that sand that you're sifting through. Somebody could say to you, you know, that song was absolutely trash. It was way too, you know, aggressive, and sure, one person is all they're going to hear is that song was trash. The other person will be like, actually, you know, maybe you know what, maybe I am being too aggressive in the song. What would happen if I tried to tame it back? Learning how to, I guess, find truths in what people are saying, because obviously that anger and frustration, if not just sheer because that person's a dick, you know, there must be some sort of underlying truth beneath it that if we can sort of understand and dissect that truth, could actually have an overall greater benefit for our creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also a balance, I think, you're exactly right. And you also have to temper that with, is that just me?
Right.
You know, if I'm going to change that, is that going to really, you know, change or, you know, remove some of the authenticity?
Totally.
You know, like I copped a bit of feedback a couple of years ago about the way I move around on stage. And I've always been aware of how I move on stage. You know, I look like I've had far too much sugar, and I probably belong in a punk band, and, you know, I'm bouncing around in my own little spot and I move a lot. Like, it's really weird to see from the other side. I totally get that.
Right.
But that's how I feel what I'm doing. That's how I get into what I'm doing. And, you know, I had someone point it out to me. A bandmate actually pointed it out to me a few times. Said, man, just try and stand more still and, you know, just chill out. And, I made a really big effort to stand still and not bounce around like a clown. And I found really quickly that I was bored, man. I really wasn't enjoying playing these same songs anymore because I wasn't feeling it the same way. Right. I was too concerned about standing still and, you know, not looking like I'm having some sort of a fit with the lights. So you have to temper that feedback with, where can I find that middle ground?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this just going to remove something inside of me that's going to make everything worse? And
Yeah.
I very quickly went back to looking like an idiot on stage because that made me feel better.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, that's cool. I'm sorry. No, I look silly, but
Mm-hmm.
that's how I feel what I do.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I wouldn't even apologize for it. It's like, it's easy. I don't know. We live in a world where we're all everybody's expectations is that we're supposed to fit into a box, and learning how to
Yeah.
be totally authentic and not give a damn about what sort of things come in like that.
Yeah.
If it ruins your experience of what you're creating, like that's I don't know. That's not
Yeah.
something that we should feel the need to sacrifice. That's like,
Yeah.
it's
Imagine telling Dave
yeah.
Grohl, "Hey man, when you're playing drums, can you not flail your arms around so much? Can you just look a bit gentler behind the drum kit?"
Yeah.
Imagine the stupidity of asking him that.
Oh, but even like the audacity from, in some ways, like one person's opinion to think that they
Yeah.
get to decide how another person acts and who they are
Yeah.
simply because you're uncomfortable with something
Yeah.
that they're doing. And there's certain things that I can understand if somebody's getting in your personal space and
Totally.
that's a whole other story. But if somebody's doing something that has nothing to do with you and brings them joy, it's like telling somebody not to smile because their smile makes you uncomfortable. It's just like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that has more to do with your fear of being happy than it does to do with their excitement and joy
Yeah.
in expressing themselves. And,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So,
What do you reckon the word? I got a question for you.
Sure.
I like this conversation about criticism because I think it's one of those things that people don't like talking about, those sort of negative contexts. I find that in general life, people don't like talking about things that get a bit deep and a little bit meaningful.
I love
What's
it.
What's the worst piece of criticism you've ever been dished out off the top of your head?
It wasn't the worst piece of criticism, but it was the piece of criticism that hurt me the most. I just started working at a post-production film studio, and at the same time I was working on kind of like a Vancouver Film School. They sort of hire you in with grads to help them with their grad projects and stuff. So I was doing the sound design and audio and mix for these kids' final. And I just started working at the studio, and I said to my boss, "Hey man, I would really appreciate it if you could check it out for me and give me some feedback, and it'd be so helpful because it's like a freaking beautiful Atmos theater that's just like, oh man, that space was so nice. That was the best. I just would go there and watch movies at night and just hang out."
Cool.
But the one day, finally, after a few weeks, he gets around to it, and we open it up, and this is a room that's like very well shot, so the sound comes through how it's supposed to. The theater that I originally mixed it in, less so. So I start playing my mix, and everything sounds off, and I'm starting to get a bit panicked. And basically, instead of being like, "Hey, no, it's okay, let's sit with this together," he just shuts it off. And I'm like, "Oh, well, can we maybe listen to something else?" He's just like, "No, I'm busy." And that was it. It wasn't even helping me. It wasn't feedback. It was just sheer rejection and shutting it off. And that basically made what the rest of my time there was, which was an experience of, to me, in some ways, kind of manipulation towards, we're paying you, therefore you should just do the work that we tell you. That was an exhausting job for me. I was working like basically 6-7 days a week. At one point they had me cutting Foley and backgrounds for 2 kids Netflix shows. That was like 10 to 12 hour days, 5 to 7 days a week. And then when I asked for, I was just exhausted, burnt out. I asked for a week off, and that was like on the Sunday. On the Monday, I checked LinkedIn, or Tuesday, and without even telling me, they'd posted the job on LinkedIn. And then on the Wednesday, on the Wednesday, they just said to me, "Thanks, but we don't need you anymore. Bye." And it was just like that. That was my final experience working in somebody else's studio. That was when I made the decision, screw this, I'm not working for anybody else in that sense.
Yeah.
But it was being in an environment where giving me feedback was actually seen as more detrimental to them than
Right.
beneficial, as though if they were to help me, that would maybe mean competition, or that would maybe mean me taking their jobs or something. So instead, they almost did everything they could to just keep me where I was. I would knock on my boss's door, ask for feedback, and he would just say, no, it's good, it's fine.
Mm.
And then he would be doing the mix with my work, and he would knock on my door, just say, like, come with me. And he would just take me to the mix station, and he would just show me what I cut, and he would just be like, don't do that. And I'd be like, what should I do then? He's just like, don't do that. And I was just like, what? Like, how do you expect me to get better? There were so many mistakes that I wasn't trained for. And that's really shaped, I think, like, how I approach people now in general. It's just like, I never want to make somebody feel the way that I felt when my boss shut off my mix, when he just refused to want to uplift me or help me out in any way. And yeah, that was a tough 6 months. So I'm grateful for what I learned there, but yeah, no, never again, man. Never again.
Clearly moved on to bigger and better things, though. So that's
absolutely,
that's the light at the end of the tunnel, right? That's what you were talking about before, with that finding that diamond in, in all of that muck and all of that negativity. You can find something good, but
for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely that definitely cuts deep.
Yeah,
I get that.
I just like I went on vacation with my family pretty much right after all that happened, and I was talking to my dad, and I was just like, I did not work as hard as I've worked just to get to that.
Yeah.
And then end here. And then I just sort of, that was when something twisted or the switch sort of flicked in me, and was like, all right, it's time to stop giving myself to everybody else and focus on myself, which, in some ways it still took me some time to break that pattern. But, it was that slow progression, as we were talking about, of getting out of my comfort zone and breaking out of old patterns and habits and cycles, to the point that I was like, screw it, let's just send a message out to Reddit and see who responds and have some conversations and, really take a risk. And yeah, so.
Yeah, cool.
For what it is, I'm grateful for it. What about you? What was the time?
Some
feedback got you.
I think similar to what you're saying. It wasn't that bad, but it was just the way that it cut. There was a band that I was in for a few years touring, and I'm definitely not going to out who it was, but
you don't have to.
I started working in that band as a guitar tech, so it was not that big a deal. And then when the artist found out that I could sing and play, he had this idea of, cool, maybe you can sing some high harmonies and play some just some other bits, fill out some of the songs. And it went from one or two songs very quickly to pretty much playing most of the set. But he decided that he didn't want the stage to look like it had a million different people on it. So he wanted me to play off stage. And that was cool. Wasn't really that turned off by it. Like, it means that I can still do the guitar teching thing. And, I don't have to worry about making sure that I'm, looking decent and all of that. And that went on for a few years, and it was kind of cool. And then for a particular tour, he wanted some keyboard parts for some of the songs. And then, I said, oh yeah, I can play keys. So we went through all the rehearsals and I learned all the parts. It was about 3 or 4 songs. And then I said to him, hey, we should set the keys up on stage next to the drummer and put a couple of acoustic guitars next to it. And it's my own little station. I can live there because now I'm playing everything except 2 songs. So, and he told me that the main reason he didn't want me on stage is because I didn't look the part compared to the rest of the band. And that, look, you don't fit the image of the band, and, you're a bit bigger than the rest of us, and, it just doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. And again, it wasn't the feedback itself. It's not that bad. It's, but ouch.
Yeah.
You mean I get to continue playing your entire gig all the time off stage because I ain't good looking enough for you? Like, yeah. Okay, cool. Fair
Huh.
enough. So, but that really sucked
Yeah.
because it was. I think at that stage it was about 4 or 5 years of touring with that band. It was like, oh,
Right.
now I feel a bit shit.
Yeah. I don't blame you. That's yeah, man.
Yeah, it was an interesting one.
Is that something that like after that did you sort of reframe and redirect?
No, not
Or
really. I just kept
no?
doing what I do because
Oh.
okay, whatever. That's your vibe. That's what you want
Hmm.
things to look at.
Is
Cool.
that
Okay, I'll just keep doing what I do, and I'll keep getting paid, and that's fine.
are they still a band you play with?
No, I
Okay,
stopped
yeah.
probably about a year after that. A year or
Okay.
so after that, I stopped touring with them. So I gave up.
Mhm.
I gave up touring about nearly 10 years ago. I stopped touring. Um, yeah, and I mean, he and I had not a falling out, but a bit of a disagreement.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, that was kind of the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's as much as, I look back at my time at the studio in a sense of like I don't know, not necessarily disdain, but like of course what happened there it hurt and it affected me. I
Yeah,
also, much in the same way, like when somebody says something like that to you, I think it's often to me sort of a sign of life is redirecting me somewhere else, and it's just like, this maybe isn't the environment I'm meant to be in, because I think if it was a band that really supported you, they'd say, heck yeah, when can we get you up on stage? When can we, tell the
yeah,
audience your name and really support you and bring you up as
yeah,
well. So
yeah,
yeah, I think it's
yeah. That was
usually
it was
those
an
moments.
interesting time. And look, it's one of the things that people that aren't in the music industry, sometimes you out bands by explaining to people that no, that guitar part's being played off stage, or hey, no, he's not doing that. That's all controlled somewhere else. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Hmm.
Yeah, man. There's like three musicians off stage or under the stage that you can't see. And people don't believe it, and it's a weird thing because there's musicians that aren't getting credit at all for the music that they're performing and for the hard work that they're doing. They're never seen, they're always heard. You always hear what they're doing, but you don't know they exist. But,
Hmm.
there's some Muppet on stage whose name is on the poster that's getting the credit. It happens all the time.
I mean, I think that's more or less the entire music industry in some ways, especially like up in the higher echelons of the pop world. You look
Yeah.
at how many freaking producers and musicians and people work on a single track. You have one song with five
Yeah.
producers, seven writers, 20 different musicians. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
All
then,
because they added one word each and they
yeah,
all get a credit now. Yeah.
yeah. And they all get paid handsomely, maybe because of
Yeah.
it.
I
Which,
wish.
yeah,
I wish.
I know. I think everybody in the music world wishes that. But yeah, I think music tends to also just on that note, it kind of focuses on the front man. That's I think also
Yeah.
been a big sort of cause for disconnect in a lot of bands. Is that in pop it's easier because when it's Taylor Swift on stage, it's Taylor Swift on stage.
Totally.
Nobody's asking questions. But when it's something like the Rolling Stones or Metallica or AC/DC or whatever, a lot of people are going to take note of who's singing. But the guys in the back, the drummers, the bass player, usually it always tends to sort of be the guitarist and the singer that
Yeah.
kind of get it. And then you kind of have the bass player and the drummer who are just like, oh, I guess we're
Yeah.
just the bass player and the drummer. But it's like, it's funny how, now that I think about it, the instrument that you play reflects sort of the person you are. Like the bass and the drums are really the foundation of a group, which I feel like also most bass players, maybe not most drummers, but definitely in that sort of range, they tend to sort of be that footing underneath the band that keeps everything held together. And then you have the
Yeah.
crazy guitarist who's just, I don't know, doing stuff backstage. Same with the singer, whatever they're doing. We don't need to get into the specifics, but it's funny how
We all know. We
yeah.
all know.
It's funny how those sorts of people tend to, you know, they really love the attention, and they also
Yep.
they put themselves in the position where they would naturally get the most attention. So with
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of spaces to go into discussion about, I guess, being in a band and what it means to really support one another and uplift one another and
Yeah.
of course.
And that's a hard lesson to learn, right? Being in a band, that's a really hard lesson to learn. I guess to put it really bluntly, it's that whole concept around stay in your lane, right? Know your role in the band, not only as a musician, but I guess, personality wise, and as that family and as that brotherhood or sisterhood, whatever you want to refer to it as, kind of know where you fit and just be who you are and be really authentic to yourself and the band. And anyone that's toured or spent a lot of time in a band, it really is a relationship that's not like anything else in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the ones that do start coming out of their box a bit more and trying to take over. And now, no, hang on, I want to be the bigger personality. That's when problems start happening, right? Because we don't all know how to sort of balance that out again. And how can we get this back to a nice sort of quiet equilibrium? And it's really deep and existential conversation to have, especially around musicians. But it's really important. I reckon almost every band that I've seen fall apart, especially in, a big implosion, has been because of an ego problem or a personality problem. Bands don't hate each other because they want to write different styles of music. They hate each other because the drummer wants to be the lead singer all of a sudden, and no one can work out how to create a balance with that.
Yeah.
So, you do have to understand where you fit and what your role is.
And I think it's funny how kind of, usually those ego problems tend to come in, not always, but they tend to come in at the point when a band just starts to be getting more attention. And
every time.
And like, that's the point where it is so important to stick together. Like that is your family. That's your unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, I think this sort of, it almost is some sort of self-sabotage program, maybe, where people are like, there's this deep desired need for attention to the point that somebody would actually toxically break up something that could be amazingly positive, like a beautiful relationship, like this really tight-knit band, for their own. It's almost like the knowingness of the security of failure becomes the manifestation of that band, rather than, maybe sort of taking a step out of toxic cycles, which is a whole other conversation. I love existential stuff, but yeah, breaking out of, that need to be the person that gets all the attention and doing it as a unit. It is such an absolute relationship when you're playing music with people. And if you're able to, it's releasing the thoughts, releasing the need to control, and allowing every person to shine as themselves on stage. Like those are the most amazing bands to listen to, because every person is authentically their instrument, and their instruments are all just in unison. And that is so, I don't know, that's just what really brings the whole musical experience together for me, is those moments.
And you can tell when it's not working, right? It's when a band is really locked into each other and they are all getting along and they are really authentic to themselves and each other and the craft and their instruments, and they're really into what they're doing, you can hear it straight away. And you can hear a band that's fractured. I persist that you can walk into a gig and hear that, that's not quite right tonight. You can just see it straight away.
Now you're giving me some ideas.
It does come out eventually.
It gives me ideas for like band therapy TV shows where it's like all the bands sitting together.
Every record company, when they sign an artist to a 5-year deal, it should come with a marriage counselor. Like, here's your record deal, here's your tour manager, and here's your therapist. It should be a package deal.
That's funny. Because you've probably recorded a fair share of bands as well?
Not as an engineer, no.
No?
Just a couple of local people and just a lot of demo sort of things.
Got it.
I'd love to do a lot more production and mixing now, but spent a lot of time in studios with bands.
Yeah, I interned at a music studio for a bit. Let's just say that was another space where I felt a lot of rejection from musicians. That was like, I thought that interning at a studio was going to be a really fun and exciting experience. And in some ways, I just ended up being surrounded by, not surrounded by it, but there was a lot of narcissism. There was, not to hate on people's struggles by any means, but definitely some alcoholism that was going on with some of the groups and bands, and just sort of working. It was just a very, I think the word is toxic sort of environment at times. And that's We live in a toxic culture as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think learning
Yep.
to break
Yep.
those cycles, break those habits, that's what
Yep.
that's what music's here for. I love it.
Yep. But
I,
it does sometimes or often it leads to some pretty cool stories, and it does lead to some cool music created. I mean,
mm-hmm.
there are so many forever memorable albums and songs that were created by a band that hated each other and couldn't be in the same room as each other. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a pain in the ass to be a part of that, but sometimes it does produce some pretty serious gold.
Which makes you wonder. You look at a group. To me, the first group that comes up is the Beatles, just because I think they're the most iconic of bands that by the end of their tenure were just all absolutely, I don't know if they hated one another, but they definitely weren't the best of friends.
No.
I mean, I think in some ways when you have enough talent in a room, they can kind of put it aside and just, they can hate one another, but they can still know how to lay down a funky bass lick. But
Totally.
whether or not that music is expressing something authentic or it's just expressing something because they're on a deadline and they have a month to make an album and they just need to do it, otherwise the label's going to drop them. That's
Yep.
it's a different kind of pressure, but
Yep.
that doesn't necessarily come with the joy of the music. And out of
Yeah, of
curiosity,
course.
Dan, with the concept of joy of music, what would you say is the aspect of music that brings you the most joy? On a more positive note, after kind of touching on the more negative sides of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Depends on whether I'm listening or playing.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm playing and singing, there's something that I can't put words around the feeling of playing the guitar and singing. There's just something about that it doesn't matter what mood I'm in, it just makes me happy straight away. It's that yeah, I think it's definitely a feeling as a player. As a music lover and listening to albums that I like,
Mm-hmm.
I love a good story.
Mm-hmm.
I just love a good story in a song, and I've been obsessed with Tom Petty for many years because man, he always tells a good story. I just love that everyone can take a different meaning out of the same song.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really just, if you can create something that gives people a meaning, then I think that's what we should all be aiming for. And I love, even songs that I've written that only 3 or 4 people have heard, but 3 or 4 people have taken a different meaning and a different story out of it. I love that.
Yeah.
That means that I've created something that's somewhat universal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that there's a story for people to extract out of everything that we've talked about today as well. Some of the criticism that I was given in my past episodes was to limit it not over an hour, and so we're hitting around the 45-minute mark here. So I think that's about a good amount of time for us to not overdo it, I think. But I still want to give you a second to, share any other words or thoughts that are on your mind before we wrap it up. What do you think?
Man, the only thing I really want to tell everybody that, I'm an old man and I've been doing this for a long time. I'm 40 years old and I've been doing it since I was 18. Just have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Just have fun and enjoy what you're doing. Don't take it too seriously because it's going to stop eventually. So just really enjoy it and just, take a deep breath and remember where you are, because this is a job that not many people can do.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that. And it's really cool.
Absolutely. That's that's a great piece of advice for me as well, as somebody who for many years I think tried to turn music into a job, and the more I've sort of re-embraced it as something that's it's a fun way to express myself, bring myself together with people, and just let go, enjoy life, and be in the flow of the moment. That's the beauty of it. So Dan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the depth that you've brought to it as well. I think some people tend to be, scared of getting into the nitty gritty and talk about those hard times, but having something to relate on, it's something that I think more and more, not just musicians, but people need nowadays in a world where, we've been told to be quiet in order to keep other people happy. It's time to step into our own authenticity and our voices, express ourselves, and in the process of that, create something beautiful. So
yep.
Thank you again,
man. And look, even though the conversation did revolve around criticisms and things like that, it's good. It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
It's all good, and that's why we're doing it.
If you're able to spark some sort of a reaction of people, you're doing something right. It might not be all of it, but that's up for us to figure out as the individual. So
that's it.
Yeah, there you go. All right, man. All the best. Have a great day, and let's keep in touch.
Luck.
Thank you.
Cheers,
man. Dan, thank you so much again. That was a super fun, interesting conversation. Honestly, I started it with my guitar in hand. My guitar is still in my hand. I somehow kind of went into it with this expectation that we would be playing music together, and it just seemed to, I guess, the conversation just revolved around conversation and topics and ideas. And in some ways, it's also me like releasing my own expectations of what I expect the podcast to be. I think I try and pivot and change so much that it's me getting in my head and being like, oh man, what if I don't do it like this, and maybe people won't like it and this and that. I think having this conversation about criticism is super timely in this process, and I love how each conversation tends to sort of bring up something in me that I'm processing myself. That's a really cool aspect of, I guess, showing up to the moment and seeing what happens. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found that helpful. If you enjoyed the conversation, leave a like, subscribe. Anything helps. And yeah, if you want to be on the podcast sometime as well, shoot me a message. Would love to hear from you. My name's Aiden. This is Studio Raphael. Thanks so much for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you around the studio sometime. Take care.